Here we are in SAP S/4HANA Cloud looking at a list of freight orders that we have planned with basic transportation management capabilities. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could see these freight orders on a map and visually see the route that a truck is going to take? Well, you can. Thanks to SAP S/4HANA Cloud's extensibility capabilities, we can actually create a data feed that will expose this information that will then allow us to consume it in a third-party application, as we see here. So if you want to see how we can do this, then stick around for this particular recording. Well, I hope that this intro has whet your appetite for today's episode. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be looking at a possibly more techie-oriented subject, which is the integration of our SAP S/4HANA Cloud backend system with an Apple iOS device. The recording will be about how we can create a CDS that is going to be exposed as an external API, as an OData service, and consumed as a JSON service, a JSON feed in an iOS app. Now, the iOS app will look at the data coming in from our SAP S/4HANA Cloud system, which is going to be a list of freight orders, and then the user will have the ability to click on one of those selected rows, which is going to represent a freight order, and then further drill down into a map view of that freight order, which will show basic information, source, destination, location, as well as the distance that the truck will need to travel. Now, the genesis for today's episode is that, as some of you may know, I used to be a TM consultant, and one of the features that I really liked in advanced transportation management was the ability to have a map view to directly in the application display on a map a freight order. Of course, we don't have this in basic transportation management, and hence I thought that being able to view this on a map would be a great opportunity, as well as also polish up my development skills for the iOS platform. So I hope you like today's episode. I'll walk you through in the system what I did first on the SAP side, what the CDSs were that we leveraged, how we built it, how we exposed that CDS as an OData service to the outside world, and then we'll briefly also look at how we transition from that into the iOS app on the Apple integrated development environment, which is Xcode, and then we'll round things up by quickly firing up the simulator to actually see what the app looks like when it's running on the device. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the system. All right, so before we jump into the system, let me just quickly explain to you what was done in the SAP S/4HANA Cloud backend to make this scenario hang together. So obviously we've built a hierarchy of custom CDSs. There's a couple of levels of CDSs that culminate with this one here, YY1_iOS transportation, which is a custom CDS, obviously, that is going to be exposed to the outside world. Now, the only thing that is really specific about this custom CDS is that it was created under the scenario of external API, since we are going to be exposing the data to the outside world. This custom CDS rests on a primary data source, which is an SAP standard CDS, which is this one here, I Transportation Order Analytics, I being for interface. And this is going to be our primary data source, which is going to provide the header data of our freight order, meaning the number, the business partner, the carrier, the weight, header information. Now, what I also wanted to do here to make my life easy when it came to consuming this data feed was to have a flat structure, meaning that I wanted one line, if you like, to represent one freight order. All of the data pertaining to a freight order had to be on the same line. So this primary data source was then joined with two other custom CDSs. One custom CDS which entailed the data pertaining to the source location of the freight order, the first stop where the freight order is essentially departing from. And then we had another custom CDS which entailed the information to the last stop of the freight order. And both of these secondary data sources joined to my primary data source rest on, again, the standard SAP CDS called Transportation Order Stop Analytics. Now, what I also did was, because the system that I was using was not actually connected to the business technology platform, and hence I wasn't able to connect my TM capabilities to the HANA Spatial Services, I cheated a little bit here, and what I did was I created a custom business object and leveraged for that custom business object the associated CDS that comes with it automatically. And my custom business object essentially has a location code, a location description, although the description is more there for me to remember what each of these numbers represent in terms of locations. And then I also have put in there the latitude and longitude, which I just quickly picked off from Google Maps. Now, as I said, I've added this custom business object to be able to feed a geo coordinate to my location data, but rest assured that in your case, where you will be connected to the HANA Spatial Services, you will not need to do this. There is another location CDS, a standard SAP location CDS that is available that will house the latitude and longitude of those locations. So you'll just need to connect to another CDS that has the latitude, longitude, and not go through the pain that I did of having to create a custom business object. So once we've created the CDS, we then essentially expose the CDS in a custom communication scenario, which, as you well know, and we'll have a quick look at that in the system, is going to create a URL that the outside world can poll. And the only thing specific here again is that I have appended the URL that I'm going to be polling with the tag of format equals JSON. Again, I want the data feed to be a JSON feed. And here you have an example of what that JSON feed is going to look like. So again, we have our transportation order information, the type, the number, the carrier, the name of the carrier, some weight information, and then we have the source and destination location data. And for each of those locations, we get the code, the description, as well as the latitude and longitude. Now, the only thing that is a bit different here is the stop sequence position. And what I have done is I have, for the purpose of doing this exercise, I'm only looking at the first and the last stop of my freight orders. And I'm leveraging this standard field, transportation order stop sequence position, where F denotes the first stop and L denotes the last stop. But you could also, if you wanted to, get the entire route of a freight order, including the intermediate stops. But obviously, it would be a little bit more complex, but definitely not a showstopper. And then lastly, what it looks like is that we have this data feed, this JSON feed that is going to be consumed by our iOS app. And we've just put in a list view exposing minimal amount of data, the freight order number, the source location, the destination location, the name of the carrier, as well as the weight of the cargo. And then essentially you just need to click on one of those lines, and what this will do is it'll take you to a detail view, and it's going to map the route of that freight order. Now, also a point that is important is that the route that is going to be shown here may or may not be the same one that the HANA Spatial Services would have determined. Here, in this case, all I've really done is I'm passing the geolocation of the start and end locations to the MapKit framework, which then looks at the Apple mapping service to determine the route, which is done obviously independently of the HANA spatial services. All right, so now that we've done the theory, let's have a quick look at those CDSs and what we've set up in the SAP backend. All right, so we are now in the SAP S/4HANA Cloud system, and let's have a quick look at what we did in S4 to make this solution work. So as I said, the first thing is I created a custom business object, and admittedly I cheated a little bit because my S/4HANA Cloud system was not connected to a BTP and hence did not have access to the HANA spatial service. But in your case, you will not have that problem. Your HANA spatial services, once connected, will provide the latitude and longitude in your S4 system, and that information will be saved in your S4 system. So essentially here we've got the location code and the latitude and longitude that we're going to be passing in to our data feed. All right, let's go back. Let's look at the custom CDSs. And as I said, I have one top of the hierarchy CDS, which is this one here, which has been created under the scenario of external API. And this CDS, if you recall from the intro, is connected to two other CDSs that provide source and destination location data. So let's have a quick look at this one. As I said, the primary data source is a standard SAP CDS, and we have connected that primary data source to a couple of secondary associated data sources that are going to provide us the source location and destination location data. In terms of elements, nothing extraordinary. Freight order number, carrier, business partner, some status information, and then also obviously the source and destination location data that we are inheriting from that association. Let's have a look in terms of filter. In terms of filter, what I've done here is I have put a couple of filter with regards to the freight order types. I was only interested in the freight order type, which are the ones created inside the S4 system, and also I didn't want to be bothered with freight orders that had a status of cancelled. So I'm only really taking freight orders that are open or i.e. in execution or executed. Okay, so this is the header CDS. Let's have a quick look at the source CDS, source location CDS. And again, as you can see here, we are resting here on a standard SAP CDS that we have joined to our CDS, which is that providing the data from our custom business object, hence the geo coordinates. Again, let's have a quick look at the join conditions, and all we are doing here to join those two CDSs is looking at the location code. Let's have a quick look at the elements. Again, nothing extraordinary here. Do we have a filter? Yes, we do. We have a filter. So as I said, for my locations, I created two custom CDSs, one which would expose source location data and one that would expose destination location data. And what I've done in this particular CDS is I've hard-coded a filter to say I'm only interested here to serve data for locations that have this value of F, meaning first. So in my source location CDS, I'm only exposing data for the first location of my freight order, and I will similarly have a corresponding filter in my destination CDS, except that the letter in that case would be an L. All right, then all we needed to do was to simply expose our CDS in an external communication scenario, which is going to then provide the URL that my iOS app needs to pull to get the data, and also where you will be maintaining the security parameters in terms of how you want that external app to authenticate when it is going to be calling the SAP S/4HANA Cloud system. All right, so on the SAP side, on the S4 side, this is all that we needed to do. So now that we've sorted everything that we needed to on the SAP side, the next thing that I wanted to quickly check was to see what the output would be if I was going to poll the URL that I exposed in my custom communication scenario. So for that I use Postman, and as you can see I'm just doing a get call. I've put in the URL that my custom communication scenario generated for me, and the only thing that I really added to it that is of importance is the additional tag at the end, which, as I said, format equals JSON, so that the output does comply with the JSON output format. And we can see down here at the bottom what this output looks like. So it's working, which is great. So I can see the information that I had chosen as elements in my custom CDS, the transportation order type, the number, the carrier details, the weight, the location details, as well as obviously the latitude, longitude, which is going to be really important for this particular exercise that we are trying to do. Now, another great feature that also exists within Postman, and I don't know if you are aware of it, but here we have this little sign, and if you click on it, it's going to open up a new pane which shows you a code snippet which is more or less ready to just copy paste into your own application to consume the OData or the URL, I should say, that you have defined here in your call. And obviously there are a number of target environments that you can select from to generate that code, but I'm going to be writing my app in Swift, so I've chosen the Swift URL session option, which has generated this code, which, as I said, is more or less ready to just copy paste into Xcode. So that's quite a useful and nifty little piece of additional information that I just wanted to pass on. Then the next thing that I quickly wanted to show you was to make sure that the output is going to validate. I'm using this URL called jasonformatter.org, which I find quite useful and nifty. So all I've done here really is pasted the output that Postman gave me, and in this little application you can validate and format, beautify the output so it becomes a bit more readable, but as I said, also more importantly, it allows you to make sure that the output is going to validate. There aren't going to be any issues such as missing brackets or what have you, so this is all good. Then the next URL I want to show you is this one here, which is quicktype.io, and this is also a URL that I found some time ago when I started to experiment with parsing JSON in Xcode apps that I was writing. And what I've done here is I've pasted the JSON output from Postman, which I validated in the previous JSON formatting URL. And what this site here does is it generates the code that defines the structure of my JSON. So as you can see here, there are several options that you can pick in terms of the language, again, the target environment in which you're going to be consuming the incoming JSON. So you can pick the language, you can pick whether you want to create structs or classes for it. There are a certain number of other options that you can play around with, but these are the settings that work for me. And so just to give you a bit of an idea, what it has done is it has looked at the structure of my inbound JSON, and for that created the structure that is going to help me to parse pretty much painlessly this JSON in Xcode. So again, here I've got a number of files that are more or less ready to just copy paste into my Xcode environment. The only thing that I've really done is made some corrections in the sense that here, for example, we can see that this code has generated enums for certain fields such as the business partner and the location description. And what I found was that if I suddenly had a new freight order with a carrier that was not listed here, or if my freight order had a location that was not listed here, then there would just not be anything coming up in my app, and so obviously there was an error somewhere. So in Xcode I've kind of cleaned up all of this part of the code so that if I do use a different carrier or a different location than what was included in that sample feed that I provided here to generate the structure, it's not going to be an issue. All right, so the next thing is to go into Apple's IDE, Integrated Development Environment, which is Xcode, and have a quick look at what we did there. All right, so now we are in Xcode, and it's probably not necessary for us to run through each one of the Swift files that have been created to create this app. But what is noteworthy here is obviously here we have the code that is going to pull the URL that we exposed via our custom communication scenario in SAP S/4HANA Cloud. And most of the code that is there is pretty much a copy paste of the code that was generated in Postman, or at least it certainly provided me some good starting help to fast track my code. So we have this function which is going to be called whenever the navigation view here, list view, sorry, is going to appear. So when it appears, we do the perform load data, which essentially goes out to S/4HANA Cloud by the use of calling that function to pull the URL to get the data. And also we've implemented a pull down refreshable. The other thing that might be interesting is the JSON struct, and this is essentially that code that was generated in the QuickType.io website. As I said, pretty much a copy paste. I only did a minor cleanup in there just to make sure that there wouldn't be any issues when I would add a different location than in the initial payload that I used to generate the code in the first place. Okay, so that's on the Xcode side. The next thing that we can do is simply go into the iOS simulator and see what that looks like. So let's go for it. So this is now the iOS simulator, and we are simulating an iPhone 13 Pro in this case. So let's go on to the next pane. We can see that we have the icon corresponding to our little app. So let's click on it to launch it. And as soon as the list view is fired up, it calls that function that goes back into SAP TM. And as you can see, it's downloaded a number of freight orders corresponding to the parameters that we had in our CDS. Basic information is coming through here on each one of those cells. So we've got the freight order number, we have the source location and the destination location, as well as the carrier name and the total weight of the cargo. So let's click on this particular row here, and this then takes us into the map view. And as you can see, when this map view was implemented, we first honed in on the region of the source location, and then we zoomed out to show and map out the route as well as the destination location. So what we also did was, when you click on the destination location pin, it shows the distance between those 2 points, which is the distance that the truck is going to have to travel along this route. And again, here we've repeated some information pertaining to the freight order. Let's go back and let's pick maybe another order that goes a little further than across the bay in California. So we've got this freight order here going to Golden, which is in Colorado, and it's also departing our shipping point 1710. Let's click on that. Again, we hone in on the region, we zoom out, we show the route, and as you can see here, we are going all the way out into Colorado. So there you go. Quite a fun project to do, and quite easy to do. So yeah, if you want to try it, there you go. So there you go. That was a fairly easy scenario to set up, but this scenario should by no means be considered production ready. If you did want to roll out a similar kind of scenario in your organization, then I would strongly recommend that you look at the SAP Business Technology Platform, the BTP, to see how you can leverage that to route the OData service through that app, as well as take care of the onboarding of the users, the authentication of the users, so you've got that security aspect well pat down. And of course, you can leverage the Fiori and Android SDKs that SAP has to facilitate that transition, that deployment onto mobile devices. So until next time, stay safe.